And just a couple of other things about economics in all sorts of different ways, but it has to ultimately be about behaviour. And some of the so-called failures of infrastructure are due, in my view, to the thought about, done any serious research into, the behaviour of the users, not just, in some cases, the end users. I mean, why don't people use any of the tunnels that have been built in Brisbane and Sydney? That's clearly not just a failure of some engineering consultancy in terms of modelling, it's a failure of understanding human behaviour. And there are obviously behavioural impacts right across the board. So I think it is important that we see infrastructure with that human dimension, which is, I think, essentially what Sharon was also saying. And just a couple more points. I am interested in the question of, I think narrative is a word that's now popular in politics. I think we do suffer from the language around infrastructure, and the point's been made about, what actually does it mean? And I think that's a good question. How do we define it, and what is sort of behind it? It can be as wide as everything and as narrow as a very small piece of physical work. So I think thinking about the words, what is it, who pays, why should anyone pay, it all goes to forming the debate. And one of the problems most people here would say, look, user pays is a really sensible way to fund some things. But clearly the public don't always think that. In fact, the public mostly don't think that. And again, I don't think you can really expect the politicians on their own to carry that debate, or in my case, simply to ignore the debate and do it. I think you actually need a much more broadly based effort to develop a narrative, for want of a better word, about infrastructure, its importance, its long-term nature, and all of those sorts of things. So I don't think we should shy away from the fact that both the behaviour point and the narrative point are a bit soft by normal infrastructure or engineering or economic criteria. I think they're actually very, very important if we're going to be serious about a new approach to this area. And there is a couple of practical examples of that. I think we're hopeless in Australia about having public debates on anything difficult. We show that regularly. If you think about density, about population movements, all of those things, but let's put them under density. Density is obviously of profound importance. It's why you can do some things in infrastructure and it's why you can't do others. It needs, there needs to be a sensible, independent and well-researched debate about why density is good, what sort of density, where and how. That's just an example, but actually quite an important one, because many of the actual projects that people in this room are either developing, want to develop, are researching, actually fall over in most cases, because Australia hasn't got high densities, and it's not surprising that metros in Sydney don't work as well as metros in a lot of other cities, because the density's dramatically different. So that's the sort of thing. Also, I mean, we've had smart infrastructure facilities had a session looking at different utilities models and whether you in fact should always stick to the existing model, electricity, water, gas, telecommunications. Are there models which might collapse all of those into one entity? Don't know. May well not be practical. But we shouldn't be hidebound by the existing or traditional institutional models in infrastructure supply. We ought to be willing to. We ought to have an open mind, and we ought to get the information. Again, you can't make the judgment about whether a so-called multi-utility, which of course there is in Canberra of sorts, whether a multi-utility makes sense. Very hard to know if you don't have the data that enables you to assess it in an independent sort of way. And just one final point in that same context. This is about stock. Gary made the point. It's about the existing infrastructure. I mean, most people come along to this today and their minds are about new projects, fast trains, roads, whatever. The reality is, of course, that the biggest problem is the existing infrastructure stock is not as good as it ought to be. It's in the wrong place. It's this, it's that, or the other. So one does have to have a mindset about infrastructure that deals with the quality of the stock. And some of Brian's work that you'll hear about makes the same point. It's fine talking about what the new things are at the margins. A large part, and it may not be so sexy, but a large part of the issue and a large part of the progress is in what you can do about the quality, renewal, etc. of the existing stock. And you'd have to say, with respect to Sharon and my previous career, most politicians' heads don't think it's quite so good to be fixing up an existing water, dam, as building a new one or building a new road or whatever it might be. So I think that's another example of how, hopefully together, we can help form the debate a little more realistically and productively than otherwise. And I won't talk about funding models because other people will, but again, my general impression is everyone knows who the natural owners of infrastructure are in Australia, and absolutely sweet nothing happens. And again, I think it's not beyond the wit of people outside the super funds and other financial institutions to actually help develop models of infrastructure provision that enable, at least in part, the natural owners of infrastructure to end up owning it rather than what has happened historically in Australia. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that's as much as I want to say. I absolutely agree with what both Gary and Sharon said. I mean, this is hopefully going to be a really important day because it isn't intended to be a one-off. It is intended to be a start, a platform, and to end perhaps where Gary started. I mean, yes, we were delighted that the federal government supported the application that the University of Wollongong made, and yes, that is where there's a nice building which no doubt the Minister or someone's going to open sometime soon. But the reality is that we understand that in Australia you effectively are battling to have one decent national research approach in an area like this. And so we're 100% fair dinkum in terms of wanting to collaborate with the word Gary used.
The problem is too big and too important to be bedeviled by the usual sort of competitive juices and federalist juices that exist in Australia. So thank you all very much for taking a day of your lives to come, and I hope it will be a truly productive platform day. Thank you.